So, good morning, friends. So, today I'll be talking about this new topic. It's a 22nd COVID update. So, whether there is a role of thrombolysis in severe COVID. So, friends, as you would know, we are treating a lot of COVID patients, and invariably, the trend that I've been seeing in some of the tele rounds and in my own unit is patients where they would be seemingly okay on NIV HFNC, and we see the D dimers uptrending, and despite them being on anticoagulation, and seemingly they look okay pulling along and plateauing on NIV HFNC, then they suddenly deteriorate and they die. So we do not know why such acute events seem to be happening, and when we intubate them, they really don't improve with their gas exchange. So we are contemplating whether, since we understand that the ARDS in COVID is distinctly different to a conventional ARDS with a normal compliance, and so is what we are seeing in our intubated patients. So, is there a role for thrombolysis in the face of D dimers acutely going up? So, in two of the deaths that we recently saw, D dimers went, from 1,000 to 5,000 acutely, and then patient collapsed and deteriorated. So, I just wanted to review this topic and see if there is any evidence in this. So the first in sort of an impetus for us to look into this came from this particular protocol. So we all know Paul Marik and his popular cocktails. So this particular protocol, which came from Eastern Virginia Medical School, came on 17 June 2020. So interestingly, when I was going through this document, I saw this mention about giving RTPA. So the infusion that Paul Perick incorporated in his protocol was RTPA. He gave 25 milligram over 2 hours, followed by 25 milligram as an infusion over 22 hours, not to exceed zero point 0.9 milligram per kg. So this is the protocol he has incorporated in his protocol as a salvage measure when patients are not doing well despite full anticoagulation and despite all the other ventilatory strategies. So it was interesting. So when I went to the protocol, there were so I looked into the literature. So there are two case series from USA which has looked into the role of thrombolysis. So obviously, if you look into randomized control trial or a hard data, you wouldn't find, because this is an acute situation. So we only have to extrapolate from the observations the authors have made in these two case series and see whether as a salvage therapy, when all the measures are failing and we know that patients would eventually succumb. So is this an option to consider with patient's consent as a salvage measure? So this is the question or the hypothesis that we should have in mind. And we don't have right answers at this point of time, but we could only contemplate whether there is a role. So this is the paper I reviewed. So this came actually pretty early on 21st April 2020. So the title is COVID-19 Critical Illness Pathophysiology driven by diffuse pulmonary thrombi responsive to thrombolysis. So this came from the US group. So the authors here extensively deliberate on lot of microthrombi that has been witnessed in their autopsy findings as well in the lung. So what they have found is there are a lot of areas of lung in COVID ARDS which show areas of infarction and ischemia. So this raises the question whether there is an extensive microthrombi that is happening. So and they found that it is fairly heterogeneous. So some of the hypothesis is there is a extensive release of von Willebrand factors from the endothelial cells which leads to all this microthrombi formation, and there are various other mechanisms. So basically the authors do deliberate upon various receptors these COVID virus acts on. So it acts on ACE2 receptors, and it acts on these receptors called TMPR 552 sialic acid. So by acting on these three receptors, which are predominantly present in endothelial cells, it leads to the clot formation is what has been hypothesized. And these are some of the pictorial representation as to how the clot formation typically happens at the alveolar level. So all the alveolar vessels, there is an extensive clot formation is what has been hypothesized, and these are all the various receptors in the endothelial cells and alveolar cells on which the COVID virus typically acts. So as I said, it acts on the ACE2 sialic acid receptors and the TMPRS receptors. So these are the receptors on which the virus seemingly tends to act and causes microthrombi. And they've also found there is lot of the alveolar microcirculation which is disrupted, and there is lot of injury to the endothelial cells, and there is a lot of clot formation that happens, and this is just a pictorial representation of all the microthrombi that tends to happen at the alveolar level. So when you look at the alveolar level, so this is what typically pictorially we could sort of represent or schematically present. There is lot of microthrombi at the alveolar vessels, and to compensate for all this microthrombi that happens at the alveolar vessels, there is areas where there is lot of vasodilatation. So there are areas of pulmonary vasodilatation, and there are areas where there is a lot of pulmonary vasoconstriction with extensive thrombus formation. So this is the typical pattern they are found in autopsy models. And the authors do deliberate that why they improve with increasing the PEEP. So the authors do suggest that when there is increased PEEP, you wouldn't expect the oxygenation to improve because there is a extensive VP mismatch and shunt fraction. But the authors do suggest that there is a reduction in the cardiac output which reduces the shunt fraction, and that tends to increase your increase your oxygenation. And this particular hypothesis that increase in the PEEP improving the oxygen by reducing the cardiac output and reducing the shunt, and this similar pathognomonic feature was found in SARS-CoV-1 experience as well. And thrombolysis is done with an intent that it reduces the shunt fraction, and by obviously clearing all the microthrombi at the alveolar level circulation. So now we look into the case series. So they looked at 4 cases. So the 4 cases, the patients were 55 to 60 years of age, who were mechanically ventilated and who were in shock. And so we'll go one by one. So the first case was a female, diabetes, obesity. So she had a D dimer. As you see, all these patients had high D dimer, had a D dimer of 5.7 micrograms per ml, and their range was less than 0.5 micrograms per ml, along with shock and AKI. So it was around maybe 1,000 times, 100 times higher, 100 times higher, 5.7. So their range was less than 0.5 micrograms. So and they had shock with AKI, and this patient needed noradrenaline at 30 micrograms per minute with vasopressin at 2.4 units per hour. And this patient was intubated on FiO2 of 60%, and as you see, they were on a high PEEP, 15 PEEP, and PEEP-LAT of 27. And here they gave, at this point of time, they gave recombinant tissue plasminogen activator at 50 milligram as an infusion over 2 hours, followed by 2 mg per hour plus heparin infusion they gave. And this was the ABG before thrombolysis and after thrombolysis. CO2 was going high, indicating there was a lot of dead space ventilation, and that came down to 40, and PO2 significantly increased after thrombolysis from 45 to 78. And noradrenaline also was weaned from 30 micrograms per minute to 4 micrograms per minute. So this was a significant improvement they found in this first patient. The second patient was a female, diabetes and obesity. As you see, obesity seems to be a common factor. And D-dimer, as you see, was 6.1 micrograms per ml, and as I said, it was less than 0.5 was the range, and patient was in shock. Here, patient was on noradrenaline 15 micrograms per minute, and she was on ARTSNet ventilation, FiO2 of 70, PEEP of 15, and PEEP-LAT of 25 centimeters of water. So here again they gave RTPA at 50 milligrams over 2 hours, and after they initiated RTPA, vasopressors were weaned off. So this is the third patient. Again, you see obesity seems to be a recurring phenomenon, at least in this case series. Male patient, diabetes, obesity and hypertension. D-dimer was 4.6 micrograms per ml, and with shock with AKI, similar to the first patient, and very high norepinephrine of 50 micrograms per minute, along with vasopressin of 2.4 units. And patient was on FiO2 60%, PEEP of 5, tidal volume. This is a typical ARTSNet. PEEP-LAT was 14. So here again they gave, so in this whole case series you give RTPA was given at 50 milligrams. This was given in a little shorter time because possibly patient was very sick, in 75 minutes. Otherwise it was given as infusion over 2 hours. And as you see, pH improved from 7.14 to 18. PCO2 came down. PCO2, high PCO2 indicating a lot of dead space ventilation. And PO2 again sort of 84 to 66 it showed. And noradrenaline was reduced in this case. So at 50 micrograms per minute, it came down to 7 micrograms. But this patient had a cardiac arrest and died. And when the patient had a cardiac arrest, they did an echo. And echo showed biventricular thrombi present in this patient. So typically again shows D-dimer going high, So in all these case series, you see where D-dimer is high with hemodynamic instability, and all these patients had hypotension. So that typically was an indication that they have given thrombolysis instituted, and they found that vasopressor significantly came down. And this particular patient showed echocardiograph evidence of biventricular thrombi. So this is the fourth patient who was a male, obesity with hypertension, who had convalescent plasma, who had received convalescent plasma. Here again you see D-dimer of 6.6 micrograms per ml. Again was in shock, so all these four patients in this case series were in shock with AKI and requiring noradrenaline of 10 micrograms per minute. Again very sick ARDS, FiO2 of 100%, PEEP of 16 and P-plat of 30 centimeters of water. Here again they gave RTPA 50 mg as an infusion over 2 hours followed by 2 mg per hour plus heparin infusion. And you see pH improved, CO2 sort of remained same, PO2 significantly increased from 81 to 140. And this is a graphical representation. See, this is the timing of RTPA, and you see the PO2 in these patients having increased acutely, and then you see norepinephrine significantly coming down after the institution of RTPA. And the authors also hypothesize in patients with, especially with comorbids like diabetes, hypertension, and obesity, there is a lot of endothelial damage that they would be vulnerable to or susceptible to. And this endothelial damage, obviously, we understand leads to the microthrombi formation that acts as a nidus where there is extravasation of leukocytes and fibrin clots are formed at the areas of endothelial damage, and this makes them vulnerable for microthrombi formation. So the hypothesis is any patient with the comorbids of diabetes, hypertension or ischemic heart disease, obesity, so they may be more vulnerable to form microthrombi, and if in the face of them deteriorating with shock, with high D-dimer, should we then consider this thrombolysis as a salvage measure when we understand the patient may be deteriorating and may succumb, which we have been seeing in many of our own patients where there is sudden acute deterioration in the face of D-dimers going up and despite all full anticoagulation. So this is a hypothesis generating paper. So this is the second paper which I could find. So there are two case series. There is one from China which I couldn't access. So this again came in 2nd April 2020. So this came in an international journal, Journal of Thrombosis and Hemostasis. So that's a good journal by the US group. So here they looked at again. So we saw the later case series on 4 patients. This was in 3 patients, 75-year-old male, 59-year-old female, and 49-year-old male. So in this, 2 survived and 75-year-old male died. So they used thrombolysis in situations very similar to the previous case series where D-dimer was high. So D-dimer was kept as an indication along with some hemodynamic instability in many of them. So in this 75-year-old went into multi-organ failure and died. So here they use, see, if you see the previous case series, they used 50 mg over 2 hours, and in 2 cases they used as an infusion. Here they have used RTPA 25 mg over 2 hours and given as infusion of 25 mg over 22 hours, not to exceed more than 0.9 mg per kg. And this is the one which Paul Merrick has incorporated in his EVMS protocol. So looking into these 2 case series, it raises a question to all of us. In a patient who has comorbids, who is elderly, diabetes, hypertension, considering they may have some endothelial damage, and in the face of increasing D-dimer, acute rise in D-dimer with hemodynamic instability, and clearly understanding that all measures possibly are not succeeding, should we contemplate on using this thrombolysis as a salvage therapy when we clearly understand that we are at the end of the road and all the options of treatment modalities are exhausted. So this is a question. So we do not have a right answer. We need to be very carefully select which patients we would use this as a salvage measures. And obviously when we use it, it is good to take a patient's consent and maybe discuss with cardiology colleagues also to take their concurrence before we institute this. But this is a hypothesis that would raise a possibility that possibly we can offer something in patients where all options have been tried out and patient is still deteriorating. So thank you very much. So end my talk with this nice cartoon. So I'm sure many of you would have seen this going on WhatsApp. So there's a lot of factors which has a bearing with this COVID situation. So 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 thank you all. So keep this in mind, and you can visit my website to rehear to this lecture, and it would be good to make our own observations if we institute this therapy. So thank you all.